We're reaching playoff times on the PGA Tour. Who is going to come home FedEx Cup champ? We have some stats for you on recent winners at St. Jude's, why they all won. Plus, it's a very unique course on the PGA Tour. What exact type style is going to win at TPC Southwind? You got to start with this. Stay out of the water. There is water in play on 11 of the 18 holes. That is sixth most on tour from last season in 2023. And how about this stat? No one is hitting the ball in the water more at any course than this one on the PGA Tour. Since 2003, over 6,000 balls in the water. That is over 1,000 more than TPC Sawgrass, Chris Brees, and Will Gray here on Key Stats. Hit that subscribe button. Will, what does that water ball stat mean to you here off the top?
Chris, I'm not a doctor, but I do believe that means we're going to see a lot of double squares on the scorecard this week, even though we have a limited field, no cut, 70 players trying to get to the 50-man BMW Championship, but no one is immune to when TPC Southwind bites back, and it's usually, as you said, going to be on those water balls. There's 12 par fours, a lot of dog legs, a lot of difficult carries and things like that, and it's a situation where one error doesn't need to be compounded. You could have one bad swing lead to two shots, and that adds up in a hurry.
It really means you have to do your research this week when you're making your picks. That's what Key Stats is here for. We're going to go over most strokes gained of any player in the field at this course and its history. We're going to go over course form, recent history from past winners here. We're also going to look at our one big key stat, but we want to start with the nuggets on this course because these TPC courses tend to be very similar.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that this is one way where TPC Southwind stands out because it really does play to the ball strikers. And that's no surprise to have it at this part of the schedule where you've got the postseason kicking off at the FedEx Cup playoffs. We're 2 weeks away from the Tour Championship at East Lake. You know, surprise, surprise, you need to be a really good ball striker if you want to have a chance to move up in the point standings, if you want to have a chance to make the BMW next week out in Colorado. But, I mean, 25-yard wide fairways, 4,300 square foot greens, tiny targets off the tee, tinier targets from the fairway. It's really going to be imperative to keep the ball in front of you. And I recall, a line from Rory McIlroy a year or two ago at this event where he said there's such a cluster of shots on approach that are in that 140 to 170 yard range where he said if you've got your pitching wedge to 7-iron dialed in, you're going to have a good opportunity to score here at TPC Southwind. And that's really kind of where I would focus some of my research and where I'm looking at some of these trends and these stats. That's going to be a big indicator because you just don't have the margin for error to miss here, either off the tee or as we're seeing here on these flyovers into some of these greens.
You don't necessarily need to be a bomber off the tee. You got to hit it and play well enough and really make your misses count. If you're going to miss a fairway, don't hit it in that water on 11 of those 18 holes. Make sure you're making those misses count. And then really, are you kind of looking at players who, you mentioned ball striking obviously, but players who are able to dial in on small greens, meaning greens in regulation? Are you looking at greens in regulation or are you looking more proximity to the hole, stuff like that?
I'm looking at procs first before I'm looking at GIR percentage because that's really, for me, a bigger indicator of the aim small, miss small philosophy, right? If you're able to get it inside 20 to 30 feet, depending on the length that you're talking about from the fairway, that's going to be a bigger key for me than did you hit the green that might have been, the size of a barn. So that's where I would start, but just knowing the balance this week, and I know we're going to get into it a little bit more, but as we heat up into the playoffs, as we saw last year with someone like Victor Hovland, this is a time where momentum really matters. We saw it last year with Lucas Glover, right? He just won Wyndham. He comes over this week and wins in Memphis as well, not in the field this week to defend that title, but I might be having my thumb on the scale a little bit for recent form versus course history specific to TPC Southwind. I need someone that fits the mold of a player that will play well here. You need a ball striker. You need someone that can handle their business on and around these smaller greens. But bigger for me is going to be how are they playing right now? Are they riding a little bit of a heater at the right time? When you're talking other team sports, that's what it's all about, right? You want to peak at the right time. If it's football, basketball, whatever, same thing applies for the postseason in golf.
Since you brought it up, let's go to it now, that slide. We're looking at recent champions at TPC Southwind. Justin Thomas was before it was a playoff event, but still same part of the schedule, very similar style in terms of, structures of the events, et cetera, et cetera. You kind of hit it on the head there, Will, with 3 recent winners of Lucas Glover, Will Zalatoris, and Justin Thomas. All of them had played some kind of good golf immediately before their win. Now, what we're looking at here is in the blue how each of these winners did their previous 5 events before they won. And in the white is their course history, whether it was before or after they won. Let's start with their recent form, the blue boxes here. Lucas Glover was playing out of his mind before he won here. He won Wyndham the week before. Will Zalatoris had some pretty solid starts immediately before, tied for second about a month earlier. Justin Thomas, it was COVID year, but everybody was playing that summer of COVID year because they wanted to get back out on the course. He had a playoff second place. He had another T10, a T8, I should say, top 10. So you hit it on the head when you said for the last 3 weeks, players are not going to find their form suddenly in August.
Yeah, that was it. You stole the line. I was going to use back at you. Whereas
Say it again.
This is not a place where you're going to find your form. This is a place where you come in with some form, with some momentum, and you put it on display. Remember last year, Lucas Glover had to win at Wyndham just to get into the top 70 field. So he was not even expected on the radar for Memphis before his run in Greensboro a year ago. We don't have anyone that fits that dynamic this time around. There was no bubble movement last week at the Wyndham. The 70 that started the week or the 70 that ended the week, with Victor Perez now in that number 70 slot, the farthest man back from the top 50 cutoff at the BMW. But I think even Perez is a great example of someone. He's been playing well recently, right? He just had a 4th place finish at the Olympics. That's a bit of a one-off because he's playing at home and there's a lot of emotions there. But that just goes to show, I think, whoever ends up on the leaderboard this week, not only because of the caliber of the field and it's smaller with 70 guys, but everyone that is playing at this point, more than likely they have a data point or 2 in the last 4 to 5 starts that shows, hey, I've kind of got my stuff together here and I'm peaking at the right time of the season. I know we've looked at the odds makers. Listen, I'm a Peter Malnati fan. I'm not looking to dog the 2-time winner here, but he's down at the bottom because you look there and you say, well, what exactly has he done since winning the Valspar Championship? And there's not a lot. And this is not a place typically where you're going to turn around 2 or 3 months of middling form and all of a sudden strike hot at the right time. This is more often going to be someone that's a little closer to the top of the board. I know when we look at the odds, it's surprisingly Scotty Scheffler won, Xander Schauffele 2. Those guys have been, you look at any key stat you want and you can find a reason to pick one of those 2 guys. But even if you go beyond them, it's a situation where momentum and current form is going to rule the day, but within the confines of, do they have the type of game that can fit a TPC Southwind where you have to work the ball both ways, you have to avoid the water, you have to be able to find smaller greens, and you have to be able to get up and down on the few chances that you do miss these greens.
So moral of the story, if you're trying to make picks here, if your player hasn't necessarily been great at Southwind in the past, not a big deal. Make sure their recent form has been there. How about our one key stat? We talk about all of these, driving stats, accuracy on the fairway stats, but the one that all of the winners since 2019 have had in common is scrambling. Look at Lucas Glover, Will Zalatoris, Abe Ancer, Justin Thomas, Brooks Koepka, the last 5 champions. Their rank in scrambling: 1st, 7th, 1st, 6th, and 1st. We've gone over every data point today on what made these guys win, and this was the only one that stood out in terms of what they all did well, and there's really one reason for that.
I just love seeing the Will Zalatoris stuff on this highlight. There's a part of me that wishes he tried to hit the rock shot to beat Sepp Straka. Great to see him back at TPC Southwind this week. But yeah, as you mentioned, these guys are not going to have a chance to miss a ton of greens and still be in the mix, but when they do, they need to be able to get up and down with some regularity. Also, remember where we are in the geography, right? We're in Memphis, and we can have another offline discussion of whether Memphis, Tennessee counts as the Southeast. But regardless, we're talking about Bermuda greens, and those are different than the bent grass greens or the surfaces you're going to see next week at Castle Pines up in the mountains. So you have to be able to deal with scrambling on into the grain chips and pitches where it might run away from you down to the water, things like that. So all those little sub variables also come into play. But as you said, this is about as good of an indicator as you're going to get of consistent success to show that you don't have the margin for error at TPC Southwind to have a rough round or 2 even around the greens and still be able to keep pace with the leaders.
Full disclosure, off the tee is important, but we didn't find any of the guys who did well in recent years being that great. They were top 20, they were top 30, they were good enough. It was scrambling around the greens that really made these players stand out. Now, how about...
Well, I also think, Chris, before we bounce there, I think that shows that no one is immune from what lies around TPC Southwind. Eventually, you're going to spray one. You're probably going to have a water ball. Listen, if you go 72 holes here playing the same ball with no penalty shots, you're going to be in the top 10. I'll guarantee you that. But more often than not, someone along the way, they're going to stub their toe, and it's what do you do to limit those mistakes? What do you do to turn those penalty strokes into bogeys and not doubles? And a lot of that points back to, as you said, scrambling, and it's getting up and down from the bunker to save a 5 maybe on one of those par 4s and not turn it into a double bogey.
Everything you're saying about it makes it a unique course, and that's why we need full disclosure on our strokes gained access here this week, because I haven't seen this really any other week where we don't have a whole lot of players, and Will's going to tell you why in a minute, whole lot of players who are really distancing themselves from everybody else. Will Zalatoris has only played twice, a first and a T8. That's why his numbers are so great. Justin Thomas, Sahith Theegala, Rory McIlroy, Taylor Moore. Look at all the randomness and negative strokes gained all over the course for all of these guys. I haven't seen it any other courses, and there is a reason for that.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming off a week at the Wyndham Championship where you and Ben Everill were in this slot on Monday talking about one of the most predictive courses and tournaments on the PGA Tour, where if you play well at Sedgefield, you usually play well year in and year out, and that's just not the case because of the difficulty and the penalty strokes that lie around, as we go back to the top of the show. Of all those water balls, you just don't have that margin for error to where you can put together one start, let alone 3 or 4 in a row, that show that you're able to rack up these green stats that we're looking at here. I mean, Chris, your data here is going back to 2019, so it's kind of apples and apples. It's only been a playoff event for the last couple of years, but it was a WGC before that. You have the same dynamic, right? A limited field, no cut, around 70 guys. So that helps to build out our data set and our numbers that we're looking at as we look here at guys like Sam Burns and Hideki and Colin Morikawa. There's a lot to like in parts, but no one is going to jump off the page and say, hey, I am the horse for course at TPC Southwind, because they just don't exist. Because eventually people are going to, as I said, stub their toe. They're going to, have the caddy hand them another ball. You're going to be putting a double square in the scorecard, and it's what are you going to do to bounce back from that? How are you going to be able to try and keep it, keep the train on the tracks? Because that's what it's going to take this week if you want to move from the outside of the top 50 in, or if you're in the mix, someone like Morikawa or Hideki Matsuyama, and you really come into this week with an eye on that FedEx Cup prize in a couple weeks in Atlanta. What am I going to do to jockey for position in this 3-week marathon? It really starts this week with avoiding the unforced error.
So basically what we're telling the viewer out there right now is strokes gained at this course doesn't really mean a whole lot. Since we have it up on the screen here, I'll let you make your pick of any of these 10 players you want to talk about. Burns, Hideki, Morikawa, English, Tommy Fleetwood. Let me get the other slide up here momentarily. Willie Z, JT, Sahith, Rory, Taylor. You want to talk about any of these guys who might maybe pique your interest when we get to making picks for the roundtable coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here in terms of the strokes gained stat. It's still an indicator and somewhat predictive of for me of success this week, but it's more about building a type of player. Who's the archetype that can handle this course? And then I'm matching that with who's playing well right now and what might be maybe a 50-50 split some weeks, maybe a course like last week at Wyndham, it was 60-40 in favor of course form. This week, it's 60-40 in favor of recent form. So there's room to factor in both. It's a bit of a soft science for everyone as they begin their handicap to see how much they want to put their thumb on the scale in one direction or the other. But one person, I'll go back on the other page there, Chris, that I'm fascinated to watch. We were talking about him a few minutes ago offline, is Colin Morikawa. To start, 4th in points, having won nothing all year long, despite his best efforts. He's been someone that has had roundtable fodder for several months now. We've been talking about Colin Morikawa, but he hasn't finished worse than 23rd in any start since the Masters. Just remarkable consistency without ever getting over the hump to get that victory. Really, he's got 4 or 5 green boxes there. I mean, everything on paper says that Colin Morikawa is a good fit for pretty much any course you're going to throw at him. But I'm fascinated to see if this is maybe the sort of mix of moment and course requirements that could put him back on the board. And then does he have the opportunity to close one out? And do I have the intestinal fortitude to try and predict it? I'm not sure yet. It's only Monday. It's a long week left before we start locking in some picks.
I mean, it always goes one of two ways, right? Either Colin's peaked this year and he can't do any better than he's done, or he's going to go back to those years where he was winning big events and have something click in his head. And 2024 just was a means of getting there and being patient. We don't know which one it's going to be with Colin Morikawa. Before we do say goodbye, I do want to talk about Rory McIlroy, though, because he's the guy with all of the talent in the world. You could say his numbers, his stats here pop. Are we going to sit here and say his scrambling game has been great lately? No. Historically, has it been? Absolutely it has. What's your thought on Rory McIlroy this week? Having all of this stuff from the past, the U.S. Open, wanting to do good at the Open, maybe some lag from the Olympics. What are the thoughts on Rory McIlroy and maybe a rebirth here for a guy who really has been playing some really good golf in 2024?
I'm in wait-and-see mode with Rory. Be interested to see how some others feel tomorrow on the round table. He's the only person that's won the FedEx Cup 3 times before. He's going for a fourth, which would further his unprecedented record dating back to 2007. Listen, I think for him, it's all about East Lake, regardless pretty much of how he plays this week and next. He's going to be in the mix. He's going to be within striking distance on that final leaderboard where he knows what it takes to come from behind in the FedEx Cup's starting strokes format. So he would like to be up in those top couple of seeds, but doesn't have to be. I think that he's going to come out with maybe a little bit more cautious approach, knowing that, again, he's looking at this as a 3-week, a 12-round piece of work, not necessarily isolating these 4 weeks in Memphis. So, yes, he wants to rack up points. He wants to move up the board. But I don't know that there's the urgency of I need to fix it now. I need to solve it right now, knowing that next week is a course up in the mountains at the elevation that could play to his advantage. Even though it's tipping out over 8,000 yards, you're going to have to bring an abacus up to Castle Pines to figure out what club to hit out of the fairways. And then East Lake, no one loves East Lake. Maybe Xander loves East Lake more than Rory. Outside of that, it's 1A and 1B. So for him, all roads lead to Atlanta, and then it's what can you do during that FedEx Cup finale. What
Will also means by wait and see is when you're plus 900, you want to wait for the live bet. As Benny Betts, our boy Ben Everett would always say, you want to wait for the live bet when you got numbers that low, right?
Yes, for sure. Sad that we didn't get into Stroke and Rendezvous or Central Barbecue here for a true dissection of the Memphis food fair. Maybe we'll bring that up on Roundtable with Ben and our friend Jason Sobel up in Memphis. We'll get some inside scoop, but perhaps that's the ultimate decider of can you hang at TPC Southwind if you know where to get your ribs after the round of the right place.
Deal.